Many claim that the Canon EOS R5 Mark II is a disappointment, that it's not worth the price. And one viewer asked, "Can you please make a video on how we did not get a WOW camera? I already own the R5 and see no reason to spend $5,000 for the Mark II. So disappointed." But before we get to the details, please subscribe to this channel. It doesn't cost you anything, helps this channel grow, and keeps you up to date on the latest camera coverage. Can we really say that the R5 Mark II isn't a WOW camera, at least when it comes to video capabilities? And that's the whole point of this video. What I'm going to do is lay down my best argument as to why the R5 Mark II is a WOW camera. And then what I would like you to do is to either argue my point or argue against it, letting me know what you currently shoot with and why you think it is a WOW camera, maybe any points that I've left out, or more importantly, why you disagree, why you think it isn't a WOW camera. Again, let me know what camera you currently shoot with and give us your reasoning behind why you think it isn't a WOW camera. Because remember, a lot of people watch these videos, but they also pay very careful attention to the comments down below. So if you give us a very detailed, articulate response, then it helps people understand your viewpoint as to why, okay, maybe this isn't such a great camera, and that will help people make the best decision. However, it is important to note that every review out today is based on pre-production units or even beta units. And I'll cover off all that contradictory information later on in this video. But now, let's turn our attention to Luminance. The R5 Mark II gets Canon Log 2 in addition to Canon Log 3. Canon Log 2 provides 16 stops of dynamic range. This is thanks in due to the new stacked sensor. Okay, so Canon Log 2 provides us with 16 stops of dynamic range, but the real strength behind Canon Log 2 is the ability to preserve detail in the shadows. If you've been watching this channel for many years, you're probably familiar with many comments where people asked, are we going to get Canon Log 2 in a firmware update? And we never did. And the reason for that is the old sensor that we have in the R5 Mark I, the camera that I'm shooting with right now, it didn't have the capabilities, it didn't have the technology to be able to deliver those 16 stops of dynamic range that Canon Log 2 needs to be able to, well, be useful enough to give us decent results. The Mark I had limited codec options, but the Mark II offers RAW in 8K, SRAW in 4K, giving us HQ, ST, and LT just like the Canon R5C. We can also choose between H.265 and H.264. And this gives us many more options than we had in the Mark I. For example, shooting video with the Mark I, and I often shot with Canon Log 3, and if you wanted to have that dynamic range, all the extra dynamic range, you had to shoot with Canon Log 3 or Canon Log 1. You couldn't just shoot 8-bit with that extra dynamic range, and what the R5 Mark II does is it gives us many more professional level codec options like the ones we see in the R5C, and it also uses the same terminology found in the R5C. But there is one codec that is missing from the R5 Mark II that I really wish Canon had put in this camera, and that's Apple ProRes, a codec found in Panasonic, Nikon, and Fuji. And along with a wide range of codec options that borrow the same terminology from the cinema cameras such as the C400, if you're actually shooting with the C400 and the R5 Mark II, it's easier to, well, edit in post because you're using the same resolutions, frame rates, and terminology. It's easier to line things up. The new 45 megapixel stacked full-frame sensor has a much faster readout speed than the Mark I, which dramatically reduces the rolling shutter. And while the readout speed of the R5 Mark II isn't as fast as the 1-year-old Nikon Z8, which is quite a bit faster, the rolling shutter on the R5 Mark II is significantly reduced compared to the Mark I. The original R5 had a good, reliable autofocus system, but it did have trouble tracking subjects in a group or when people or subjects got in the way or temporarily hidden by another object or subject. The Mark II fixes these issues with improved subject tracking, even if the subject is in a group or is temporarily hidden by another subject or object. And AI priority mode focuses on the subject with the ball in sports like soccer and basketball. I've been shooting with the R5 for some 4 years, over 1,300 videos, and it rarely ever had any issues. Now in the studio, if I accidentally moved the tripod too far back, then yeah, autofocus, it would have trouble once I got beyond around 9 feet, but I solved that by just keeping the tripod close enough. For everything else I was shooting, run and gun, I didn't have any issues, with the exception of one scenario. If I was shooting my son, whether he was playing a game with his friends outside, like soccer for example, or if he was doing karate, whenever I would start filming, the autofocus would latch onto him, but as soon as another student or player got in the way, guess what? It would jump. It was frustrating. It was very frustrating. It could take me an hour or two of video just to get enough for a minute. It was so frustrating. And that's why I think this is a big date. If at least what we see when the production units are in our hands and delivers, as Canon says it does, this is indeed a big update. The R5 Mark II has internal image stabilization like the Mark I, but instead of 8 stops, it now supports 8.5 stops of stabilization.
Now that is in camera, because beforehand we used to talk about lens as in the combo, the lens and the in-body combo mix on that way. This is 8.5 stops in body.
Oh, right.
Really? 8.5 stops of image stabilization, regardless of the lens attached, regardless of whether it has image stabilization in the lens. 8.5 stops? Well, Pro AV pushed Canon's Barry Griffith a little bit further.
So you stick any lens on it, PL mount to a PL
lens. That's what the pushing provides, effective stabilization all the way through. So this is a big thing.
And according to Peter McKinnon, that IBIS wobble, well, it's much reduced to the point where when he was shooting, he didn't really notice it. He didn't notice that annoying warping. Well, Peter, there's a reason why you didn't notice any perceptible IBIS wobble. Let's go back to the interview that Pro AV did with Canon's Barry Griffith for, well, an explanation as to why.
If you had wide lenses on there, you get the classic wobbles on the edge. Yep. You're going to find here again, because of deep learning and the algorithms and the way it's looking at it, that will be reduced. I'm going to use the word reduce. You never clear anything away, but it will really take that back to make it a usable shot.
And I hated that warping. It really was, it's one of those things where if I had the choice, I would just toss out the video and reshoot it. And there is one way I kind of got around it, is whenever I was shooting landscapes, if I was shooting with a 24-105, I would just simply set it to 35 and I didn't have any issues. It's only once I got below 35 that I really started to have problems with certain landscapes like the one you're looking at right now. But if the subject was up close, I really didn't have any problems. But this vista, it's a beautiful vista, and it's absolutely ruined with that IBIS wobble, that warping. It's just irritating. The R5 Mark II delivers 8K 60 RAW without requiring an external power source, which we can't say for the R5C. And we now get SRAW in 4K, an option that we didn't get in the Mark I. And this is significant. The R5 Mark I that I'm shooting with right now, I rarely shot RAW because you had to do it in 8K, and well, the files were massive at around 325 megabytes a second. Now, as most of the times I was basically outputting in 4K, so the 8K oversample 4K mode for the R1 or the R5 was perfect. I used it a lot. To have an SRAW available in 4K with various compression modes reduces the file size and the requirements of any sort of editing computer, and that's a really big deal. I do have large cards, 1 terabyte and 2 terabytes, but if I had to shoot 8K RAW just to get RAW and just to get that detail 4K, well, as I did with the R5 Mark I, I never used those modes. It was just not useful. And the fact that the R5 Mark II still doesn't support larger size capacity cards like 4 terabytes, yeah, it's really good that we have these other modes, and that's a really big thing. But in terms of video, some other resolutions we got, so we got 8K up to 60 frames per second, but we also got to be able to shoot full HD, that's 1920 by 1080 at 240 frames per second. But there is one point of confusion. Canon documentation of 4K HQ or 4K Fine, which is oversampled 4K, is contradictory at best. The documentation in this particular case doesn't even bother to list off the frame rates in 4K Fine. Take a look, you won't see them anywhere. While Canon Europe's website indicates that 4K can be downsampled from 8K up to 60 frames per second, and even 4K downsampled to 2K. I mean, come on, Canon, this is just sloppy. You should be able to tell us one way or the other that the R5 Mark II can deliver 8K oversample 4K up to 60 frames per second, up to 30 frames per second. And because we know the camera's capable of 8K up to 60 frames per second, then we know you can simply downsample that, giving us 8K oversample 4K up to 60 frames per second. And to not do that is just, well, using that cripple hammer. It's one of those things that your customers really, really hate. And, you know, based on the latest numbers that I've seen, that your market share has dropped down to 42% and that Sony is fast on your heels, let's not irritate customers by, you know, just giving us 4K HQ or 4K fine up to 30 frames per second. Give us 4K, 24, 25, 30, 50, and 60 frames per second, 8K oversampled in those frames per second. It's just, I'm just telling you, Canon, based on what I've seen with the third-party lenses, that didn't go over well. People weren't too happy about that. And the initial overheating in the R5 Mark I, when it first came out, that you could put it in a freezer for half an hour and it still wouldn't change the times. It didn't take into account the ambient temperature. That was really frustrating. And firmware 1.6, you showed that we could deliver unlimited filming in 8K, 4K, with the exception of 120, regardless of the temperature. I tested in 70 degrees Fahrenheit, 80 degrees Fahrenheit, and the def director, Brian, he tested at 96 degrees without any issues. I went for 2.5 hours before I stopped the filming. So yeah, this is one of those cases you need to come out and let us know, yes, it's going to be 8K oversample 4K up to 60 frames per second. And if you've got some bean counters saying, no, 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 or marketing people saying, no, no, let's just do it 8K oversampled up to 30 so we can protect the R5C, yeah, don't do that. Both of these cameras, the R5C and the R5 Mark II, are expensive cameras, over $4,000. I'd advise you doing that. And for everybody else watching, not Canon, at this point we don't know because we're seeing many contradictory bits of information. I was talking to Jordan Drake and he says, at current, based on the pre-production unit he had, it just does 8K oversample 4K up to 24, 25, and 30 frames per second like the Mark I. But again, we see Canon-owned documentation saying it's going to go up to 60 frames per second. So maybe that's based on what they're going to do in a final firmware update for the final production unit. We just don't know at this point. But it's a little bit amateur hour at this point. We've already had the announcement and we're getting contradictory information from Canon themselves. Do you remember the 90D? Yeah. 24 frames per second, all I, on the announcement night, and then we woke up in the morning, Canon was still saying you've got it, and then 2 hours later they said, oh, nope, sorry, our bad, it doesn't have it. One of the big updates for video shooters is the expansion of exposure tools with the Mark II to include false colors, waveforms, in addition to the current zebras and histograms. And that's a big deal. I know some people love false colors, whereas for me, I really love waveforms. You can see so much with waveforms. You can see your subject. It's kind of like if you've ever seen that movie, The Matrix. You can see all the stuff coming down. Some of the characters could actually understand the Matrix. Well, that's how I see waveforms. I can actually see the scene. You can read the IRE. I can see how the IRE looks for my subject, different subjects in the background, and it's absolutely amazing. You can see where you're clipping in the shadows or in the highlights. I really love it. But Canon, please, as you did for the R5C in a firmware update, please give us the ability to change the size and the position of the waveform monitor. Finally, after much ranting by me and others, the R5 Mark II finally comes with heat pipes, and it also supports an active cooling grip for extended record times. Now this is in addition to the auto power off temp mode that came out in firmware 1.6 for the Mark I. If you recall, up to that point, you were lucky to get maybe half an hour of record time, and whenever you went out, it was like owning one of those electric cars. You had range anxiety. You didn't know how long the camera was going to go before it overheated. But when that firmware update came out, all you had to do is change the overheat power temp off from standard to high, because if you didn't do that, the problem didn't go away. But by doing that, I could record for hours upon hours at 70 degrees, 80 degrees, and the def director tried 96 degrees. I didn't because at that time we didn't get those kind of temperatures. But it was a really big deal to be able to record almost unlimited. Now I don't have the R5 Mark II in my hands, but as soon as I get it, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to check out all the settings. I'm going to make sure the auto power off temp is set to high. I'm going to flip out the LCD, and then I'm going to record in all the modes to see how long I can go. And that's without using that cooling grip. And I think I'm going to go ahead and buy that cooling grip just because I need to be able to test it out and let you know. But yeah, the definite improvements, having those heat pipes, because what it allows the camera to do is to draw all that heat from the center of the camera outside without reducing the weather sealing. And then if you do put that power grip on, the cooling grip on, that can further increase the record time. So there's going to be a lot of testing once we have the production units. Right now, we don't have production units out there, and of course we don't have the latest firmware. And last but not least, we finally get a full-size HDMI port. That's really a big deal. In the studio here, I'm always shooting with the Ninja 5 external monitor, and I have to use that little cable protector because when you put that micro HDMI cable in, it's very loose and wobbly, and if you bump into it, it's easy to snap it off and send the camera off for a repair bill, and that's the last thing I want to do. So really glad to see that we have a full-size HDMI port. But again, what we were talking about here, I've given you the best argument as to why I think perhaps the R5 Mark II is a wow camera, at least when it comes to video. Now, if you're a photographer, certainly you can benefit from the improved autofocus system. You can improve from that stacked sensor and some of those other gimmicky features like low noise. When I first heard that, I thought, wow, it produces less noise, but you actually have to go back into, after you shot the image, you have to go take a look at the image and then you tell it to remove the noise. And really, how is that any different from doing it in post with your favorite software? So I didn't really see that as a big deal. So $42.99 for the R5 Mark II. The R5 Mark I, as you can see, is on sale for $28.99. Sometimes it's on sale for $29.99, and it's been at that price for the better part of, what, 3-4 months now? It's rarely gone up to its regular price, which is actually discounted before going back on sale again. So we have the R5 Mark I for $28.99, and if you buy it used, or if you buy a refurbished model, I've seen them for as low as $21.99. As a photographer, if you don't need those enhanced autofocus capabilities and a stacked sensor, then yeah, don't get the R5 Mark II. But as a video shooter, for me at least, as I spend most of my time shooting video, full-size HDMI port, that is nice. Canon Log 2, I'm really excited by that. I can't wait to see it and test it out. Having a lot more options in terms of the codecs that are available. And of course, oh, what was I trying to say? I just lost my thought. Let me go back up here. The exposure tools, waveforms, and some of you are excited by false colors, but waveforms, if you're not a video shooter, you don't understand how important that is, but it is infinitely important to understand how to expose properly. I was out shooting today, shooting some cars, and one of the things I was doing is I was overexposing by 2 stops. And you might be thinking, why on earth would you do that? Well, part of what I was shooting was the engine block, and in order to not have any noise, what I did is I raised the exposure until, and I was looking at the histogram here because I don't have a waveform, so I was raising the exposure as far as I could go without clipping the highlights. And then what that allows me to do in post is I can bring down the highlights, I can bring down the shadows without any noise. Or if I shoot it with the exposure right at 0 or to 1 stop above, when I bring up those shadows, what do? I introduce noise. The nice thing about waveforms is you're able to see how everything is. A histogram just shows you the lightness and the darkness of a scene. And sometimes you do want to have things kind of clumped to the bottom or to the top. So I'm really happy to see waveforms. And if you're interested in purchasing the R5 Mark I, which is right now around $28.99, the Nikon Z8, the competitor to the R5, I would say the R5 Mark II, it's $34.96. Or if you want to pre-order the Canon EOS R5 Mark II for a little bit high price of $42.99, I wouldn't be surprised if that price comes down before Christmas. Well, I will be surprised. It's Canon after all. But your best chance of getting a deal is Black Friday, not December. It's always Black Friday's the best deals in camera gear. Because I do think $42.99 is a little bit high when we look at the Nikon Z8. Also a stack sensor, also 8K up to 60 frames per second. It even does Apple ProRes, offers a few more codecs. Very good camera and a faster readout speed. So I have trouble understanding why Canon priced the R5 Mark II at $42.99. I guess because they're Canon and feel they can, right? So if you're interested in purchasing any of those cameras, please use my affiliate links in the description down below. I've got the pre-order links right at the top. And a big thanks to you, all those of you that have used them, because the amount of revenue that I get from the YouTube ads is very, very minor. Where I make most of the money to support this channel is from when you guys use my pre-order links, my affiliate links in the description down below, because I get anywhere from 2 to 8% back. And a big thanks to all of you that have used my links in the past. It's very much appreciated. And a big thanks for staying and watching to the very end of this video. Now, have I left anything else out? No, that's it. One thing I do want to say is, you know, I don't believe in stating this is my opinion, because by just me saying it and not referring to facts or from other sources, it is my opinion. I do think, having taken a bit more time to look at the specs, to watch a lot of reviews, that in terms of video capabilities, the R5 Mark II did get a really big update. It's kind of like those firmware updates we got for the R5 Mark I. By and large, most of those firmware updates were for the video capabilities, with the exception, I think it was firmware 1.4 and 1.6, where we got autofocus improvements. We're seeing that the R5 Mark II really got a boost in the enhancement of capabilities related to video or new video capabilities. From a still standpoint, I think this is a much tougher decision to determine whether the R5 Mark II is right for you. I think from a stills camera, the R5 Mark II was already an impressive camera, but I don't think the update is a wow camera from a photo standpoint. From a photo and still standpoint, you know, I'm more than happy to state publicly that I think the R5 Mark II is one of the best cameras on the marketplace. Paired up against the Nikon Z8, I think they're two of the best cameras out there for hobbyists that have got the budget, or for professionals that are looking to start their own business or to improve upon their business. I think they're all really incredible cameras. But the one camera that I'm looking forward to seeing next is what Sony does with the a7 IV, and of course the a7S4. Pretty well every camera that's come out since 2020 from Sony has basically taken the capabilities of the a7S III and changed them a little bit and put them in a different camera and changed the price. These new cameras, the a7 IV and the a7 V and the a7S4, they're going to get a major update. We're going to get new sensors, we're going to get new image processor, new capabilities. And I'm really curious to see how Sony leads and innovates, because what Sony seems to be doing now, especially when they came up with that global shutter sensor, they're aggressively pursuing reaching their goal of being #1. I don't know what Sony's up to, because the leaks we're getting are few and far between. But I wouldn't be surprised if the a7S4 and the a7 V surprise us in a bold way. We'll just have to wait and see. Again, thank you for watching to the very end of this video. Have yourself a great day, a great week, and we'll see you again soon.